Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics like wealth creation strategies, investment principles, creating passive income, paying off your debt faster, and much, much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 360 Money Matters podcast. I'm Billy and I'm joined by my co-host,
Andrew. Good to be back again for another podcast.
Andrew, it's always good to be back and getting back into the swing of things in the new year. So looking forward to getting this one done and getting a little bit more value of what financial planners do into the ears of our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a really key podcast because, look, there's obviously, what we do as financial planners, but incorporated within that is how you should be thinking about your own financial plan.
I think they're all key. I'm biased, obviously, because of what we do for a
delusions of grandeur, Billy,
and for a living and with the podcast. But no, you're absolutely right. This one is key, and we thought it'd be fitting. I guess new year, sort of new financial mindset, new goals, financial New Year's resolution, all of that sort of thing, and thought it'd be really fitting to talk about and kind of almost summarize a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about previously, but what do we do as financial planners day in, day out, and how does that help people, and what does that look like a little bit more specifically, and how does that help clients essentially? And I thought it would be a really fitting time for us to talk about that because that could help people shape their thinking and their mindset around their financial goals for 2022.
Yeah, look, what we've been doing with the podcast has largely been around looking at specific areas of advice, looking at specific concepts around wealth creation, around finance and all of that stuff. And what this podcast is all about is just putting it all together, sort of taking a step back and looking at the entire financial planning process. So sit back, take a drink because we'll be done in about 3.5 hours.
Write some notes down, you reckon?
Nah, we'll try and keep it nice, short and succinct. And so we'll be touching on a few really massive areas of advice and trying to condense that information down to some smaller bite-sized pieces.
Maybe we just need to talk faster, or our listeners can listen to us on 1.5 times speed. But no, we shouldn't take too long to get through it. But we're going to talk about...
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you on that because I've got a pretty good story. For all of those listeners out there, Billy's focus on efficiency is so much so that he will watch Netflix on 1.5 times so that it goes by faster and so that he can condense the amount of time that he spends watching a movie.
It makes sense. It just means I can binge more in a shorter period of time. It makes perfect sense, right?
You're a psychopath.
So anyway, let's get back on point, right? So we're going to be talking about the 6 key elements of the financial planning process or the financial planning strategy and the things that we talk to our clients about. But I just want to really frame this, that the thing that I guess we do, and I'd like to think that we make it look easy. So we're trying to turn the complicated into simple and give people confidence and peace of mind around their position and the direction that they're going in. But essentially what we're doing is engaging with people, understanding what they're all about, understanding where it is they want to go, have an understanding of their circumstances, what's realistic, and then figuring out what that picture is and helping clarify and put that into perspective for clients. And then really our job is to really 2 things, I think: reverse engineer that position to see what we need to do and when we need to do it in order to get there. And then the second thing is, on an ongoing basis, make sure that we're on track with that. That is a really simplistic, overarching explanation of, I guess, what we do day in, day out with our clients. And we go across, I guess, 6 key areas that we're going to talk about now. Andrew, if you want to kick us off into sort of the first key area of what we talk to people about.
Yeah. Look, the first sort of key area when we're engaging with any new client is, what are your goals? What do you want to achieve? And this is, I think, something that really can get confused quite frequently, just because a lot of the times, at least in my experience, when I'm talking to a client and you're asking, what are your goals and what do you want to achieve? A lot of the times people are talking about the financial steps, their investment strategy, rather than their actual goals. So a lot of people are saying, I want to buy an investment property. Now, obviously that's a great thing to aim towards and it's a good goal that you want to achieve. But we're trying to take it a step further here. We're not trying to look at the strategies that are going to help you achieve your goal and the products and assets that are going to help you achieve your goal, but rather what are your goals? Do you want to provide a passive income for yourself in retirement? What's that level of passive income? What time frame are we talking about? Do you want to pay for your kids' private school fees? How much is that going to cost? When are we expecting that? So really taking it a step back as to what are we trying to achieve? And if we know the end goal and we know what we're trying to achieve, developing the strategy on how to get there becomes significantly easier. So that's really what the first key step is about.
Yeah, and I guess using your example before about the investment property, the question that I would ask when somebody says that to me is, I'd ask them why. Like, why do you want to do it? And how does that tie into and fit into the larger, broader strategy and the broader picture about your financial freedom or your financial picture? Because it's easy to get lost in kind of the asset class or the particular product. But really, our focus is getting back to the strategy and figuring out where it is that we're going.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think the other key element of this and where a financial advisor comes into this as well is helping to refine those goals. And sort of alluding to it now just because I had a meeting with a client this week, so it's sort of fresh in my mind, but he's got 2 young daughters and one of his goals was to buy an investment property for each of them, or buy an investment property with the intention of gifting that property with a mortgage associated in X period, or I think it was in about 10 years' time once the kids turn 18 or over the age of 18 so that they can take over the mortgage. Now, that's a great goal and obviously really fairly large gift that you want to pass on to your children, and great. But the conversation around that was, okay, you want to gift your children an asset. Now there's going to be a mortgage associated with it. If you purchase a property and then you gift it to your children, there's capital gains implications, there's stamp duty implications, there's all of that stuff associated. Is that actually what you want to achieve, or is your goal to provide them with enough money for a deposit so that you can help them in purchasing a property once they come of age? So really taking it, what we're doing is looking at a client's goal and really trying to delve down on what it is that they actually want to achieve and refine those goals.
Yep. I guess it's easy from our perspective to just assume with a client that there's a goal that they stipulate and they express that in their own language or in their own terms. And it's easy for us to stop short at that and say, okay, take it on face value. But you're right. We always go above and beyond and try and refine that, push a little bit further, because the more that we can understand what those goals are and really sort of dig a little bit deeper, the easier it becomes. If you can identify it properly, the easier it becomes to know what you're aiming for and what course of action you need to take in order to hit that. So getting that right at the start and really drilling down and refining those goals is absolutely crucial, because if we can get that right, that sets the foundation to execute the whole financial planning strategy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that then rolls into, I guess, the second area of things that we talk about, cash flow and surplus income. The truth is, people earn a finite amount of money. You need to spend money on your expenses in order to live and do the things that you need to do. Hopefully there's a gap or a surplus. The difference between what you earn and what you spend is called the surplus. And the question that we have, or the thing that we focus on, is really 2 things: is how do we increase that surplus? Because that's really what we use to invest and help people from a wealth creation perspective. So for us, it's identifying that surplus and then how do we maximize that? Andrew, you want to run us through a little bit about what we unpack with this?
Yeah, sort of a couple of key things that you've touched on when we're talking about cash flow and surplus income. First step's obviously identifying it. I mean, the amount of clients that have that to begin with is, I don't know, I'd say it's a fairly small percentage, which obviously being in the industry and being the type of people that we are, that's crazy for us. But most people don't even know when they come to see a financial advisor how much they're saving. Know that they're saving X amount per year or per month or per week. And a key step is identifying that, because if you don't know how much you're saving, if you don't know how much surplus you have, then it's impossible to determine what investment decisions that you make or what investment decisions you should make, because if you're investing, that's going to require a level of cash flow in order to facilitate that. So really the first key step in that is developing a budget, understanding what your income is, what your expenses are, and how much of a surplus income you have, and determining and apportioning where that surplus income goes. So are you going to put that money towards savings? Are you going to put that money towards holidays? Are you going to put that money towards investment? And what proportion are we putting to each of those different categories?
Yep. And then the second part of that process, once we have identified that, because it's great if there is a surplus, but from our perspective, if we can push that and increase the surplus, and it'd be great if we could all wave a magic wand and increase our income. Everybody would love to be able to do that. But the truth is, the majority of the time in this instance, other than things like earning jobs on the side hustles, all that sort of second job, bits and pieces like that, I guess the majority of our time with maximizing the surplus is around expense management. So looking at somebody's flow of where their money's going and what they're spending it on, and actually looking across that and even benchmarking it against what we see right across our client base and through our experience about how much people should be spending particular amounts on particular things. And then really from our point of view, giving clients ideas, thoughts and suggestions around, hey, this looks a little bit high. Have you considered that? One of the things that you should look at is this, and bits and pieces like that. And if we can get the expenses down, and we're not talking about necessarily going from living a really comfortable lifestyle to then skimping and turning off the lights, sitting in the dark with the candle on. I mean, it has to be realistic and in line with people's lifestyle expectations and stuff. But even if we can get a little bit more out of the surplus, it goes a long way once we start doing something with that surplus, like what you said, which we'll talk about during the next steps and stuff like that. But that's probably the second part of the cash flow and the surplus income strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So Bills, we've determined our surplus. We've maximized our surplus. What's the next step? What are we focusing on next?
And I should say that these are in no particular order as well too,
Yeah,
because it's more of a fluid conversation that we have with clients. But one of the other areas, especially with, I guess, a lot of people that we're talking to, and it seems to be the case once you hit a certain age, you take on debt, right? You take on debt to either support your lifestyle, raise your family, purchase property, do all of those things. But one of the things that is a really key pillar and a really key financial area for a lot of people that we're talking to is their debt management strategy. So that could be, like I said, across all of those things, but the one that really stands out is the one that hurts the most. It's the mortgage.
Yeah. And look, debt management is, I mean, this is probably a fairly large area in itself, because you think about debt management and most of the time when you're thinking about it, you're talking about, all right, how do I drive my debts down? And that's sort of looking at it in its most simplistic form. If I've got credit cards, personal loans, home loans, how do I pay it off faster? At what rate do I pay it? How much do I put in additional repayments in order to get it paid down faster? But sort of once you expand debt management out, it's not just about driving your debts down. It's not just about using surplus income to pay debt down. It's about using debt in an efficient and correct way to expand your wealth creation. We've spoken in previous podcasts about debt recycling strategies. We've spoken about the benefits associated with using debt and using leverage. You think about purchasing a property, whether that's a residential property or an investment property, your exposure to a much larger asset class by having a relatively modest deposit enables you to accelerate your wealth creation. So debt management isn't just about paying down your debts and reducing your debts. Sometimes debt management is about increasing your debts in order to facilitate your wealth creation.
Yeah, well said. It is. It's definitely sort of on both sides of the spectrum. It's not just about how quickly can I pay my debt off. It's also about how can I, if I've got the surplus income, if I've got the equity position to do it, based on the goals and objectives and the tolerance, the risk tolerance of the client, do we, should we, can we take on debt to use as a wealth creation tool to be able to accelerate our strategy or get us to an even greater position than what we would have had ordinarily before? And as part of that debt management conversation that we have with clients, sure, for some people it is, how do I get rid of the mortgage as quickly as I can? That could be it, and people are satisfied with that, and that's okay. Others, it could be, how can I utilize the whole debt piece to try and facilitate my whole wealth creation goal? But what's a common theme with all of this stuff, regardless of which sort of side of the spectrum and whatever the strategy is, it's always making sure that you've got the right product the interest rate that you've got is competitive. You're using the product to its full advantage, i.e. offset accounts and bits and pieces like that, making sure that you're not paying additional interest with late fees or paying over the top with, once again, credit cards and bits and pieces like that. So it's a much deeper conversation. You're absolutely right, Andrew, than just how do I pay off my mortgage as quickly as I can?
Yeah. And look, all of this stuff will intermingle with every other point. So you pay down your debt and all of a sudden you've got a greater surplus income because you're not needing to pay an additional, if you've paid off a credit card, then you don't need to make repayments towards that credit card. So then you've got the ability to use that surplus income towards investment or use that surplus income towards a discretionary spend fund. So every part of this strategy is going to impact, or every decision that you make on one side of the equation is going to affect something on the other side of the equation as well.
One of the next elements or the next areas that we speak about is the investment strategy.
Yeah. I mean, look, this is why people really, like 99% of the clients, this is why people see an advisor. And this is what gets most people excited, don't you reckon?
I mean, this is the tip of the spear, I guess. That's the thing that gets people to us. And generally speaking, that's the one thing people come to us about. And then when we have this conversation around all of these other elements, it kind of peels back different layers of the onion, so to speak. But this is the one that most people are interested in. This is the one that gets people most excited about. And once again, from our perspective as well too, this is crucial because the wealth creation piece in the context of the financial planning discussion is really where the rubber meets the road in terms of wealth creation and securing someone's financial future, and to a greater extent, providing some form of passive income at some stage down the track in the future.
Yeah, exactly. And look, the investment strategy is different for absolutely every person. It's different for every goal, and it should be reflective of what your goals are and what you're trying to achieve. If you're setting a goal to achieve a passive income, then determining the right course of action to get to that passive income becomes significantly, or determining the right investment strategy becomes significantly easier, as opposed to what tends to happen a lot of the times is most people's investment strategy is acquire assets, and you kind of on that rabbit wheel of acquiring a share portfolio, acquiring a property portfolio, acquiring multitudes of assets without any real indication of where are we heading towards, what are we trying to achieve, and how is every decision that we're making now a step in the right direction. So determining your investment strategy is imperative, because if you don't have an investment strategy, then ultimately you're not heading towards anything, or you're not acquiring any form of assets and developing any form of passive income. But it has to be in line with what you're actually aiming towards and what you're actually aiming towards achieving.
Yeah, really well said, Andrew. I mean, I'll give you an example of that, something that I've come across just recently. So you talk about investment strategy, and that would also tie in a retirement strategy as well. So when you think of retirement, obviously you get to the end of your working career and you're no longer working, so personal exertion to generate income. You're relying on your investments to generate that income, to provide the passive income to live the lifestyle that you want to live at that particular point in time. So for, I guess, retirement, most of the time we're talking about a passive income strategy, whereas you go and couple that with, say, a different type of investment strategy. I saw some clients earlier this morning, and the intent behind their investment strategy was to build up a portfolio of assets that they could deplete for the purpose of private school fees in secondary school for their children. So it's not to provide passive income for them. It's actually to say, okay, we've got enough money by the time the kids reach year 7. Their kids are very, very young. By the time they reach year 7, we want to have the entire school fees paid for both children from year 7 through to year 12. So when they get to that stage, basically they don't have to find the money when the bill comes around every quarter from the school.
Yeah. So different goals are going to result in a different strategy, which are going to result in different products and different investment decisions that you need to make at this point in time.
100%. Absolutely. That probably rolls into the next one, Andrew, the risk mitigation strategy.
Yeah, exactly. For me personally, whenever I'm talking to a client, and all of these things need to be taken into consideration. However, the risk mitigation strategy is really, it's just one of those non-negotiables. If you can plan for all of the best, you can have a solid understanding of your goals, you can have a really tight budget and surplus income position, you can have manageable debts, a solid investment strategy. But the vast majority of time, that's all with one thing in mind, and that's that your income still continues to come in. You stay healthy, you're still able to work, and you're still able to drive an income. If that falls apart, then
the wheels fall off
everything. Yeah. So making sure that there's a risk mitigation strategy, and that's only looking at that one aspect of risk mitigation. But one aspect of risk mitigation is if something happens to your health, if something happens to your ability to generate income, what's there in order to make sure that you still achieve your financial goals, that everything doesn't fall apart, that you still continue to make mortgage repayments, that everything can still continue as per normal.
Yeah. Yep. The way that I tend to explain this is a lot of the financial planning work that we do, we're planning for the best and hoping for the best, and the future looks bright and rosy because we've put all of this hard work and effort and energy into where we're going and what we're doing. From the risk mitigation perspective, putting the insurance coverage in place that if something does go wrong, if the proverbial hits the plan, we're also planning for the worst as well too, to make sure that there's no financial detriment in the event that something happens and you get caught out or you're just unlucky from a health perspective or whatever it may be. You spoke about income. Take somebody who's 35 years of age earning $100,000 a year. They've got 30 years left, roughly speaking, depending on how long they want to stay in the workforce. But that person there, a 30-year time frame, $100,000 a year, you're talking about an earning potential or an earning loss of $3 million. And that's without pay increases and bits and pieces and stuff like that. So your ability to generate income is actually your greatest asset when you're working. So making sure that, at least firstly and foremost, we've got that covered. And then that rolls into making sure that there's enough money to pay out debt and bits and pieces if other stuff happen. But that's definitely hoping for the best and planning for the best, but just being prudent and making sure that we've got all of our bases covered and having that plan B in place in case things go sideways and the proverbial hits the fan.
Yeah, exactly. And then sort of another avenue of that risk mitigation strategy is also around engaging with the right professionals to make sure that your assets are invested in a structure that is protecting your assets if something were to happen. So if you were to, for instance, get sued, or if something were to happen with your business, separation of assets. So making sure that you're engaging with the right professionals to protect your assets, even if your income continues to come in, but other risks outside of just health consequences. So fairly large area and fairly comprehensive area, but I think that it's just so important to make sure that we can plan for the best, but unfortunately, it's not always what happens, and making sure that there's a plan and strategy in place to account for the worst.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well said. Well said. And then I guess the last area that we focus on, which is kind of something that we come across all of the time that is really just an afterthought, and it's such an easy box to tick that it should just be done and away you go, almost set and forget. It's the estate planning piece. So having all of these fantastic financial planning strategy in place, knowing where you're going, the future looks bright, you're going to be financially secure, you're going to meet all of your goals, you're going to have passive income. Estate planning, run us through it, Andrew. What does it look like? What do we talk to people about? And yeah, let's talk about why is it such an area that's almost often overlooked or forgotten or not wanted to be discussed.
Yeah. Look, estate planning is personally, I'm not a parent yet, but Billy, you are. But for most parents and most clients that I'm speaking to, most parents aren't doing something for themselves. And most people aren't trying to make a passive income and create an asset base for themselves. I mean, obviously a portion of it is, but a lot of the times it's in order to leave it and pass it on to either the next generation or someone in particular. And so making sure that your wishes are reflected in a will, making sure that that there's a document and somewhere that reflects where you want your money to go and how you want that to be distributed as well. If you've got a young child, if you've got someone that you want to pass funds on to someone that has disabilities, if you want to pass it on to someone that has drug or alcohol issues, do you want them to receive a lump sum of money, or would you rather your assets are protected and the asset base will constantly stay there and they're provided an income stream? How do you want to distribute that money to them? And depending on how you want to distribute those funds, what are the tax implications after something happens to you? should you be holding your assets in certain asset structures that are more favorable from a tax perspective? So who do you want to pass the money on to? How do you want them to receive that money? And is the structure that you're holding it the most tax efficient structure as well?
Yep. And I guess that's the estate planning piece that ties into the end of life part of the financial planning, estate planning conversation. But there's also the guardianships and, you speak about children and things like that. So in the event that something happens to the parents, how are the kids, who looks after the children? And you can make specific requests and your wishes known about how the children are raised. So you do that through guardianships, making sure that the person or the people that you want to look after your kids know about it, agree to it, they're comfortable enough doing it, they're going to be the best version of themselves or the best version of you that they can be to raise the children the way that they see fit, that's reflective of how you do it as parents, making sure that there's enough money to raise the children the way that you wanted them to be raised, but being able to formalize that as well too is also done through the estate planning mechanism as well.
Yeah. And encapsulated in that is also for yourself. It may not necessarily be end of life. It's also who do you want to make financial or medical decisions if you're incapacitated and unable to make those decisions. It's a pretty unpleasant, look, it's not that it's an unpleasant conversation, but it's a pretty daunting conversation to have. And at some stages, I feel like the Grim Reaper when I'm speaking about it, but it's a really important consideration because you want to make sure that if you're incapacitated, if you're not able to make decisions for your own finances and your own financial future, that someone that you trust is there to make those decisions on your behalf as well.
Yeah, no, well said. And I think that's the reason, because it is a bit of a morbid conversation, and there is some shining light with this as well too, but because it is a bit of a morbid conversation, people just don't like to think about it. And it's a great opportunity for us in terms of what we do because we bring that to light and we bring it to the forefront. And it's part of us being professionals and our professionalism that we have to have those difficult conversations regardless because we have a responsibility to talk about that stuff. But the good thing is almost, and it's not the same for everybody, but once you have that conversation, it's almost set and forget until your circumstances change again or until your wishes change. Yeah. So it's not something that you need to face into every time you engage with us on an ongoing basis unless your circumstances or your wishes have changed.
Exactly right. So you said it, you think about it, you make sure that what you're doing is the right thing to do, and then hopefully you don't need to think about it for a while yet unless your circumstances change.
Exactly right, Andrew. Well, that brings us to the end of the areas of financial planning that we tend to cover with clients, but hopefully that gives people a bit of a deeper insight into not only what we talk about as financial planners, but the value that we bring when we're engaging with people as well too, because ordinarily, sometimes we see people that are addressing these areas, I guess, individually. They may have a friend that got sick, so they think, oh, geez, all of a sudden, I better make sure that my affairs are in order, so they'll go and see a solicitor and get their estate planning into consideration. Or somebody may have received a pay increase and said, okay, I've got a bit of surplus money, maybe I should buy a few shares with it or whatever it may be. But from our perspective, this is an opportunity to engage with a financial planner that takes all of these things into consideration, tweaks, adjusts, makes a recommendation, gives advice on all of these things that is in line with your goals, your needs, your wants, your objectives, and also what's realistic for your circumstances as well too. So I guess from our perspective, there's a lot of moving parts to this. It's fairly complicated, but we tend to, I think, facilitate and make that process easier for our clients to get their financial future in order.
Perfectly summarized, Billy. Couldn't have said it better myself. But wanted to pass on a thanks again for listening to the podcast. Again, in the show notes, there's our contact details if you wanted to reach out to us, if you've got any questions in relation to financial planning and achieving your goals and your objectives financially. More than happy to speak to any one of our listeners about that. So thanks again for listening. Billy, thanks again for another great podcast and looking forward to catching you all on the next one in a week's time.
Andrew, thank you too, and thank you to our listeners, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
Just a reminder to our listeners that the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and it is not intended as personal recommendations for the audience. Please consider whether the information suits your circumstances before acting on it. This information is provided by Billy Amaritis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Proprietary Limited, authorised representatives and credit representatives of AMP Financial Planning.